Looks at this and says, gosh, is there anything more important than a family? More important than the effect that these people have on one another?
Well, for me, it's just about the work.
I'm finding age is something to play with. An aging person who thinks that they are at the top of their game and everything is just perfect, who trips and falls.
People believe they recognize grief in Hollywood, but what they are usually shown is a version that has been carefully prepared. Dark clothing, steady voices, statements measured and approved before they ever reach the public. It is sorrow shaped for consumption, loss rendered acceptable through distance and control. What is unfolding now bears little resemblance to that familiar image. This is not presentation, it is exposure. For more than 7 decades, Shirley MacLaine has lived inside the machinery of this industry, enduring cycles of fame, reinvention, and erasure that most only encounter as history. At 91, she is no longer speaking from within that system. There is no script guiding her words, no obligation to soften them, no instinct left to protect what no longer deserves protection. What she is offering is not a tribute, it is an unguarded account. And that is why people stop mid-scroll when they hear her speak. She is not responding solely to loss. She is describing what came before it. In doing so, she alters the frame through which this entire story has been understood. Doors that remained closed for years are now ajar, not through spectacle, but through quiet insistence. This was not recorded under studio lights or shaped for headlines. It did not pass through publicists or legal filters. It emerged privately, from her home, in a conversation that was never meant to be performative. What has unsettled so many is not only the content of what she said, but the manner in which she said it. There is no sentimentality here, no nostalgia, no effort to soothe the listener. Her voice carries exhaustion, and beneath it, anger. An anger that comes not from shock, but from recognition. From having seen this pattern before, too many times, and no longer accepting the comfort of pretending it arrives without warning. When she spoke about cycles of treatment and relapse, she did so without embellishment. The questions were direct, the answers unadorned. Years measured not in milestones, but in returns. Adolescence giving way to repetition. Attempts at recovery stretching into the high teens. Not as confession, and not as spectacle, but as a record of how long this struggle had been present, and how deeply it had taken hold. From her perspective, what happened to Rob Reiner was not a sudden rupture. It was a slow constriction, something approaching, steadily, while remaining unspoken. She believed he sensed it, that he understood the danger in fragments, but could not bring himself to name it fully. And in her view, his greatest vulnerability was the one no parent wants to confront, the belief that love, patience, and protection might be enough to contain what was already beyond them. Their history matters here. Shirley and Rob were not bound by convenience or public association. Their relationship was forged over decades of shared work, shared arguments, shared conviction about what storytelling is meant to do. They believed it should unsettle, not distract. Reveal, not soothe. Shirley, for all her reputation for mysticism, has always been acutely grounded when it comes to people. She watches closely. She notices what others overlook. During her final visit with Rob, weeks before everything collapsed, she sensed an absence where his presence had once been unmistakable. The energy that defined him, his humor, his certainty, the force of his voice, had receded. She searched for a word that could capture what she saw, and settled on one that lingered uncomfortably with those who heard it. He seemed to be shrinking. Others had noticed strain as well. Accounts from those who observed the family dynamic during that period described tension that was difficult to ignore. Disagreements that surfaced openly. Interactions that felt unresolved, and at times unsettling. These observations, offered cautiously, were not framed as conclusions, but as signals, moments that, in hindsight, appear less incidental than they once did. Shirley described sitting with Rob and Michelle in a room that felt weighted, as though the air itself carried unease. Rob spoke little. His attention repeatedly drifted beyond the conversation, toward the driveway outside the window. He was not distracted. He was alert, waiting, concerned about who might arrive, and when. That detail, small as it seems, altered the meaning of everything that followed. From there, the story no longer resembled private grief. It suggested a deeper crisis unfolding away from view. Shirley believed the family had been aware of Nick's decline for some time, not as a phase, not as artistic frustration, but as a psychological unraveling marked by volatility and entitlement. a combination she regarded as dangerous. Rob, consistent with his nature, hoped that care, financial support, and time might restore balance. Shirley warned him otherwise. She believed that smoothing the surface would only postpone what was coming, not prevent it. In retrospect, she felt Rob understood this, that he recognized the trajectory even as he resisted acknowledging its conclusion. The pain, in her telling, lies not in ignorance, but in refusal, in knowing, and still hoping. She spoke, too, about systems that promise stability and instead deliver disruption, about treatments that appear effective until they are altered, about the fragility that follows. Her critique was not rooted in cruelty, but in disappointment born of watching the same failures repeat under different names. At a certain point, this account ceased to be solely about loss. It became an examination of warning signs ignored, of blind spots shaped by love, and of the dangerous assumption that devotion alone can resolve what requires boundaries. When Shirley finally confronted Rob, she did so without metaphor meant to soften the truth. Her words were blunt, and they were meant to be heard as a warning, not a judgment. What is emerging now is being corroborated quietly by those who were present, not by speculation or distance. It challenges the notion of a sudden collapse, replacing it with the image of a slow, visible descent that many saw but few addressed directly. There is no satisfaction in this clarity, only consequence. What remains is not a scandal, but an unease that lingers, the recognition that silence, when chosen repeatedly, becomes a participant, and that some stories, once spoken aloud, cannot be returned to the safety of what was left unsaid. What has begun to surface, through careful reporting and through what Shirley herself has quietly suggested, points away from the idea of a single, shocking moment. Instead, it suggests a slow and dangerous accumulation of strain, something that developed gradually, largely unseen, over the course of months. There are indications that law enforcement was called to the Brentwood property during that period, yet none of it entered the public record in any visible way. No headlines, no sustained attention, just absence. That absence, Shirley implies, was not accidental. In reflecting on the situation, Rob once spoke about family with a clarity that now feels painfully prophetic. He questioned whether anything carried more weight than the influence family members have on one another, and whether unresolved fractures between parents and children can echo forward, shaping generations. He spoke of having made peace with his own father before his death, describing that final year together as unexpectedly tender. In those moments, he said, the priorities of a lifetime fell away. What remained was love, uncomplicated by ambition, status, or achievement. That belief helps explain the silence. When someone carries the kind of influence Rob Reiner did, moments of crisis can be quietly redirected. Situations can be reframed as private stress rather than public concern. Reassurances can be offered, and often accepted, that everything is under control. Shirley believed Rob acted from that instinct, not to deny reality, but to shield his son from permanent judgment, to prevent a moment of instability from becoming a defining headline. In trying to protect him from the world, he may have underestimated the cost of that protection. When the image finally appeared, Nick's face, frozen in a moment that would follow him forever, Shirley did not soften her response. She said she did not recognize the child she had once known. What she saw instead was a vacancy, an absence of familiarity, no warmth, no spark, nothing that resembled the boy she remembered. Others close to the family expressed similar unease. Tom Cruise, whose relationship with the Reiners stretches back decades, was reportedly among those most unsettled by what he heard from inside the home. Those who know him describe a loyalty that is instinctive and private. In the immediate aftermath, he is said to have quietly arranged additional security for Rob and Michelle's other children, Roy and Jake. The decision spoke less to spectacle than to gravity, to a recognition that this was not an isolated incident, but something far more serious. What disturbed those listening most was the realization that this was not about confusion or misunderstanding. It was about control. Money played a role, but not in isolation. Beneath it was a deeper issue, entitlement shaped over time, reinforced by proximity to power, and left largely unchecked. For parents, that realization carries a particular cruelty, loving a child completely while confronting the limits of what love can repair. Shirley spoke with particular care when she described Michelle Reiner. She portrayed her as the steady presence in the household, the one who intervened when tensions escalated, who tried to calm what could not easily be calmed. In Shirley's telling, it was that instinct, to soothe, to protect, to preserve peace, that may have placed Michelle in harm's way, not through recklessness, but through devotion. Yet Shirley's account reaches beyond a single family. She points to a pattern long embedded in Hollywood culture, where the children of celebrated figures grow up in the shadow of names that define them before they can define themselves. For some, that pressure becomes fuel. For others, it curdles into resentment. Rob Reiner was not simply a successful filmmaker, he was a symbol. And for Nick, living beneath that symbol appears to have created more friction than pride. One detail Shirley shared remains especially unsettling in its quietness. Months earlier, Michelle had confided that they were considering changing the locks on the guest house. Not out of anger, out of fear. Fear that boundaries had already been crossed too often, and too easily. That single admission undermines any suggestion that what followed was sudden or random. In the days after the court appearance, Rob and Michelle's other children released a statement. They spoke of an immeasurable loss, of parents who were not only guardians but confidants and friends. They asked for privacy, for restraint, and for their parents to be remembered not for the circumstances of their deaths, but for the lives they lived and the love they gave. When Shirley speaks now, there is an unmistakable weariness beneath her words. The exhaustion of someone who has seen this cycle repeat, who has watched warning signs dismissed in the name of comfort and convenience. The locks on the Brentwood property, she suggested, were never about keeping the world out. They were about trying to manage what was happening inside, about living behind gates and security, yet feeling unsafe within one's own family. Rob and Michelle were not trapped by wealth or notoriety. They were trapped by love, by the impossibility of seeing one's child as a threat rather than a responsibility. Shirley described it as an emotional cage, one that prevents decisive action precisely because of the bond it seeks to protect. What has unsettled the industry most is not only what occurred within that house, but the silence that surrounded it. Shirley has spoken openly about the people who witnessed instability and chose not to intervene. Agents, managers, acquaintances who saw volatility and reframed it as temperament, who excused warning signs as eccentricity, who remained silent because speaking up would have been uncomfortable. She does not attribute that silence to ignorance. She attributes it to ease. At 91, Shirley no longer feels bound to protect reputations or careers. She names what she sees as a culture that allows power to soften consequences until it is too late. A culture where politeness replaces confrontation, and where discomfort is avoided at the expense of safety. As the story moves forward, the path ahead is unavoidably severe. The legal process will be unforgiving, and the family's fracture is already complete. What remains is the weight of what was known, what was avoided, and what might have changed had silence not been mistaken for compassion. He is known for stepping into cases already overwhelmed by chaos, situations where the damage is done and control has long since slipped away. The legal strategy, as it is beginning to take shape, follows a familiar path, emphasizing psychological collapse, questioning awareness, invoking diminished responsibility. Shirley is unconvinced, and based on what has been quietly suggested, so are prosecutors. Because beneath the careful language of filings and statements, investigators appear to be confronting a far more troubling narrative. What they are seeing does not resemble confusion or panic. It suggests deliberation. The forensic record, handled with restraint and precision, reportedly points to actions taken after the fact, choices that imply recognition, calculation, and effort. There are indications, still unconfirmed, of attempts to manage the aftermath, to buy time, to obscure traces. These details matter because they speak to awareness, to knowledge of what had occurred, and to an understanding of its consequences. With each new piece of information, the weight of the case deepens. In the midst of this, the only measure of steadiness has come from those who have stepped forward quietly to support Rob and Michelle's surviving children, Jake and Roy. Offers of protection and assistance have arrived without spectacle, without public gestures. Even so, that sense of stability feels fragile. As Shirley has said plainly, no amount of influence, recognition, or connection can stop a crisis that has been forming within one's own home. When Shirley speaks, there is a gravity beneath her words, a sorrow that feels less emotional than existential. She believes Rob remained where he was because he truly believed love could succeed where reason had failed, that it could correct imbalance, heal dependency, and undo years of accumulated harm. In her view, this is the quiet vulnerability of devoted parents. They believe love will serve as protection. But love, she insists, is not armor. Faced with forces that go unnamed and untreated, love can leave one exposed. Sometimes it does not shield, sometimes it marks. There is also the unresolved timeline that continues to trouble investigators. Authorities arrived later in the evening, but reports suggest events had already escalated well before that moment. Between those points lies a stretch of time still largely unaccounted for. Questions linger, conversations that may have occurred, advice that may have been sought. There are persistent, though unverified, suggestions of a call placed to someone known for handling sensitive problems. If substantiated, that detail could expand the scope of the inquiry considerably. Shirley has indicated that investigators are examining phone records and financial movements, not only to reconstruct the night itself, but to map the network around Nick, the people who enabled him, supplied him, and sustained instability while extracting value from it. From every angle, the picture is unsettling. Two people who devoted their lives to stories of empathy, connection, and moral complexity found themselves trapped inside a reality shaped by avoidance and denial. Shirley appears resolute that this time, silence will not be allowed to settle back in. The irony is stark. Rob Reiner's most enduring films explored innocence, loyalty, and the fragile boundary between good and harm. He spoke often of how deeply those stories mattered to him, particularly the moment when youthful innocence gives way to darker understanding. He knew that vulnerability could exist within young men. He simply never imagined it would one day confront him across his own table. That is what separates this from scandal. It is not rumor or spectacle. It is consequence unfolding in real time. A collision of power, affection, fear, and refusal, with no easy resolution. Prosecutors are now weighing allegations that carry the most severe penalties available under the law. Whether they pursue them fully remains uncertain. What is clear is that this case has unsettled the industry, and that the full truth has yet to surface. If conviction follows, the outcome could be irrevocable. The possibility of life without parole is real, and with it comes a stark reckoning. A man alone, removed from the systems that once absorbed his mistakes. The parents who intervened, negotiated, and protected are gone. There is no buffer left, no one to call. When Shirley was asked about his future, her response surprised many. She said she hoped he would live a long life, not out of cruelty, but out of principle. She did not speak of revenge. She spoke of accountability, of living with the full weight of loss, day after day. In her understanding, this is not punishment. It is balance. She believes consequences arrive in their own time, without urgency and without escape. Her words carried authority precisely because they were absent of anger. As arrangements are made quietly, Jake and Roy are focused on preserving their parents' dignity. There are no public displays, no performances of grief, only restraint. Even so, the loss has moved through Hollywood with a palpable heaviness. Messages from longtime friends are brief, fractured, marked by disbelief. What cuts through that grief, however, is Shirley's anger, because it names something broader than personal loss. She frames this not only as a tragedy, but as a failure of systems, of early intervention, of honest confrontation, of recognizing that love does not automatically repair what has been broken. She speaks of boundaries not as rejection, but as necessity, of protection not as patience, but as resolve. Her words are not intended to soothe. They are intended to unsettle, to force a reckoning with a culture that has too often shielded power while neglecting pain. Where entitlement is indulged, silence is rewarded, and denial becomes habit. Shirley appears determined that this pattern be confronted now. There is one final element that deepens the unease. The estate. Discussing inheritance in the wake of loss feels instinctively wrong, yet the legal reality remains. Under California law, a conviction would bar Nick from inheriting anything. The wealth, the legacy, the material remains of a lifetime's work would pass elsewhere. It is a reminder that consequences extend beyond the emotional. They are permanent, and they reshape what remains long after the headlines fade. None of the wealth Rob accumulated over a lifetime, none of the earnings from decades of work in television and film, would ever reach him. By law, it would pass instead to Jake and Roy. And yet, the more unsettling question lingers beneath that reality. What does inheritance mean when it is inseparable from loss? Can any amount of money be touched without carrying the weight of what it represents? Shirley shared something quietly devastating. Roy, she said, has no interest in the estate at all. She wants only one thing: to see the house gone. Sold, erased, removed entirely. She cannot imagine anyone ever living within those walls again. And it is difficult to argue with that instinct. that structure no longer represents safety or belonging. It has become a scar, a place where fear outlasted peace. As the trial approaches, more details will surface. Whether the family wishes it or not, long-buried moments will come into view, arguments, warnings, attempts to intervene that failed, accounts of boundaries set and then resisted, of hard decisions that only deepened resentment. Each of these moments, taken alone, may seem inconclusive. Together, they form a pattern, a series of small hesitations and misjudgments that all converged on the same irreversible outcome. This is where Shirley's words land with particular force. She has been clear that this should not be framed as a sudden collapse or an isolated burst of chaos. She describes it as a slow-motion collision, something visible long before impact, yet impossible to stop once it gathered momentum. Not because the signs were absent, but because acknowledging them would have required confronting truths that were deeply uncomfortable. There is no bitterness in her voice when she speaks this way, only exhaustion, the fatigue of watching people prioritize appearances over lives, of seeing reputations protected while danger grew unchecked. And that is why her message resonates beyond this single family. It speaks to every situation where silence becomes permission, where avoidance allows harm to deepen until there are no good options left. Rob Reiner believed profoundly in people, in fairness, in justice, in family, in the idea that love, applied patiently and without condition, could repair what had been broken. These were not abstract principles to him. They shaped his work and guided his life. And that is what makes this loss so painful. The same compassion that defined him also left him vulnerable. His faith in patience, kindness, and second chances obscured the threat that had taken root inside his own home. This is not simply the death of a public figure. It is the collapse of a legacy, not through scandal or external attack, but through a crisis no one inside the family could contain. A tragedy shaped by untreated struggles, entitlement left unchallenged, and a collective reluctance to speak plainly when it mattered most. When Shirley finished her private remarks, the room was silent. She said Rob is at peace now, free from fear, reunited in spirit with his father. But the true burden, she insisted, belongs to those still living. The ones left to carry the grief, the anger, and the questions that may never be fully answered. She offered no rehearsed comfort, no softened language. She said forgiveness is not guaranteed. Healing does not move on a timetable. Pretending otherwise only deepens the wound. There were no polished statements, no managed sentiment, only truth. And truth, she acknowledged, can be the hardest thing to sit with. At this point, Shirley is not trying to represent anything larger than herself. She is simply someone who lost a close friend and is furious that it ever reached this point. Perhaps that refusal to soften the edges is the most honest way to honor him now. No spin, no protection of reputations, just the kind of clarity Rob himself once brought to his own stories. This is not gossip. It is not spectacle. It is an account of what happens when silence, denial, and fear intersect over time. The picture that has emerged is not complicated. It is heartbreak layered upon missed chances. And it is being followed not for entertainment, but because accountability still matters. Those who were lost deserve more than rumor. They deserve clarity. They deserve truth. This is not a film. There are no alternate endings, no revisions, no second takes. For the Reiner family, the joyful chapters have closed, replaced by a quiet that does not lift when attention fades. What remains is an image Shirley cannot release. Rob standing at his window weeks before the end, watching the driveway, waiting for his son to arrive, afraid in his own home. That is the moment that endures. That is the loss that cannot be measured. And that is the truth Shirley refuses to let be softened or forgotten. Because some truths demand to be faced, not buried.